Classical Conversations presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortins, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of Refining Rhetoric podcast. I have my friend Josh Pierson in studio. He just finished his dissertation, and he is now Dr. Pierson. He has a doctorate of strategic security. He is in the military. He's in the Army. He's been in there for 24 years. They've been doing classical conversations for 8 years. He has 2 daughters. They started in Korea, and they've basically been homeschooling since the beginning. And his dissertation, which he just gave in December of 2023, is on detectable signatures of unidentified aerospace phenomena, building intelligence picture of capabilities through structured analytic techniques. I don't know what that means, but we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But first, Josh, welcome to the show, and glad to have you in person.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Robert, and thanks for letting me come on and talk about such a complex, dynamic, and enigmatic issue that is unidentified aerospace or anomalous phenomena. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah. So one of the cool things about what you've done is when you were working on your dissertation, I heard you were using the 15 tools of learning that your daughters have been learning over the last 8 years. And just full disclosure, your wife works for us, and she does a lot of training documents as well. So she has a lot of intimate knowledge about what we're doing. So, how did the classical method help you attain your doctorate?
Well, first, I got to say thanks to Katie Beth for all the work she helped with this dissertation and through the study of strategic security. She was the main driver of me continuing to seek higher education. And so I think that's important to put a pin there. And then with her having such a high level of expertise in the classical model of education, it helped to frame my data collection methodology and frame my analytical methodology. So how did I come across using the 15 skills of learning, I think is a term we're going with now. Which is fine. Language changes, and that's okay. I mean, if you see the definition of what's on my dissertation, vice what the all domain anomalous resolution office says, it's 2 different terms, right? And I know I'm kind of devolving here, but I think this is important to kind of get this out in the open. Why is there a difference? Well, when I started the dissertation, the term was aerospace phenomena. That was the primary means of defining it. As it's metamorphosized over time, and it seems like we've regressed, which is not a bad thing, we're now at a point to where we have 3 subjective abstractions to describe what it is that people may be encountering. And we'll get to that. But back to the 15 skills of learning, right? So when we approached this, and I sat down with her after explaining how this is a problem worthy of scrutiny, she pulled up the classical conversations catalog and said, okay, we're going to start from the top. And we went through the grammar where she made me name to make sure I was using the right term. Then after we ensured that the proper term was put in the proper context, we then attended to the details to best describe what it was we say, or people are saying when they say unidentified aerospace at the time phenomena. Now, that means we had to develop key assumptions, and we had to develop facts. And when you're doing your basic research, that proves some difficulty because you end up having more assumptions because you have to mitigate bias.
Yeah.
Right. And so as you're going through and attending to the details, you start coming across things that you need to memorize, to stick in it again in its context, so that way you can best express it as you're learning the person's story. And then after you get through naming the details surrounding the term is when you start defining it. And how do we define? The tools of dialectic. And so if you peruse a dissertation and the slides I gave at the Anomalous Aerospace Phenomena Conference 2 weeks ago, you'll see how, or I hope you'll see how those terms over time built a picture of what it is that people say they're encountering when they say that they're seeing a UAP. Now, to start with the term, it originated as UFOs. We all know that, unidentified flying objects, right? So this is where it gets fun, right? So where did unidentified flying objects came from? Well, the time typically agreed upon in the field is around 1947, although pilots were encountering Foo Fighters during World War II. When Kenneth Arnold had his sighting and the term was coined unidentified flying objects, that's what stuck for a long time. But then as the issue started to get relooked in the 90s and 2000s, how do we know that it flies? What's the definition of fly? What's the definition of object? Are these things placed in space and time? Are they material? There's a lot of evidence that supports two different tracks of what this may or may not be. So the term regressed over time as we found the best definition to fit what it is that people are seeing. And then, of course, we get to the canons of rhetoric, which is essentially how this integrates across the spectrum. So it's not just one discipline. I can't only look at this as a strategic security issue and think I'm going to solve it, right? We have to look at it through the lens of the other disciplines that are attempting to approach this issue as well. There's a component in international relations. There's a physics component. There's even a religious dynamic to it, which can be a little off-putting and be uncomfortable. But it's important to understand that, when we look at the term religion, that means to bind back. And people encounter things that completely changes their worldview, which means that now they have a religious-like fervor and devotion to what that is. And so it's multifaceted, it's complex. There's no simple answer. I wish there were, and we could, move on to other things, but there's not. So I guess that's really kind of the long version of how we ended up using the 15 skills of learning to approach this dissertation. And I want to say Jade and Christina, huge help with this as well. There were times when I'm having to build my terms of reference to where I'm sitting with them and I'm like, okay, if they don't understand it, then I need to go back to the drawing board. Yeah. And there were several times where we were going back to the drawing board because like, Dad, no, you need to go back and name it.
Because how is an Army general going to understand this if a 14-year-old CC student can't understand it? So I want to go back a little bit farther before the dissertation. You guys basically started homeschooling from the very beginning, but like what motivated you all to make that first step? Because 99% of your daughter's, education experience has been homeschooling, but there was that moment early on where you saw that the system just wasn't going to really service y'all's needs.
Yeah. So Katie Beth and I, when we got married in 2005, I hope that's the right year. We got married in 2005. She felt called. She felt convicted to homeschool. And we couldn't really put our finger on it. All I know is that a lot of times was spent with us talking about the issues that we faced in public school and how we knew that we didn't necessarily get the best education that we could have. And so one of the key points that we came to is she goes, I really feel compelled to do this and I can't put my finger on it. But as we described it again, you name and attend to the details. The crux of the issues that we came to was essentially we didn't want our kids governed by a bell.
Yeah.
It's interesting how we people look at the public school or even any group style schooling with children. And again, I'm not I don't have a doctorate in education and I don't have a psychology degree or anything. I'm just a dad when it comes to homeschooling who's here to provide an environment to where my kids and my wife feel that they can grow in not only their educational, professional pursuits, but also, they feel loved and nurtured, right? That's like, dads essentially safeguard the non-negotiables. And so
right.
that's what I try to do, right? So what it really came down to is, when you look at any school setting, really, where you send somebody to a building, is it looks a lot like an Industrial Revolution factory line. the bell dings, you get 8 minutes to talk to your friends, and then you run to the next class, and then the foreman/teacher, and again, I'm not dinging any teachers here. The system is designed to not provoke thought, in my opinion. And some teachers are very good at making that happen, and I applaud the efforts they put in. But like, you're governed by a bell, and then your shop foreman, dictates the flow and of what the next activity is. And then when that's done, you move on. And we didn't want that. So Katie Beth said, I'm going to take this on. And my only standpoint was, it can't be a hobby. We're either all in or all out, which means we commit now and we homeschool until they graduate.
Wow.
And she said, you know what? Let's do it. And so we start. So Jaden was in diapers. And I remember we would just take her around the house, and, she would, do her unschooling type of play, and we would just, guide along a parameter so that way she didn't cause too much harm to herself. And I say that because if your kid wants to touch the hot stove and you say no, there's only one way they're going to learn.
Yeah.
Why listen to mom or dad when I can, figure out physics myself? I call that fun with physics, right? And so as she grew up, we were deeply concerned about teaching her how to read. And so there was about a 4 to 6 month time frame there till we put her in a pre-K. And there were a lot of issues. Jaden was coming back tired a lot. She, her focus was kind of off, and it seemed like to affect her on like a material level, right? Not just, okay, this is annoying, but I'm going to, kind of power through. And so when we sat down with the preschool instructor, again, highly credentialed people who are very smart and having the best intentions and even really good processes that are just bound by the institutional approach to educating children, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, and she said, your daughter's learned everything in the first 3 months that I was going to teach her over the year. And so that's when we decided, you know what, we just got to do it ourselves. And Katie Beth has been the primary educator for the majority of their educational career. My role has been to help set, again, I use the term parameter a lot, but just to kind of set the boundary of what it is we may or may not be looking at. And even then, like, Katie Beth is more strict about the boundary than I am. I don't have a problem with letting talk evolve and seeing where it goes. But so after this little stint with the preschool group, we picked up Sunlight, and Sunlight is a literature dense curriculum, which can prove some difficulty if you're trying to be more structured. And so, Sunlight to us seemed to be more along the lines of like an unschooling approach, just with a literature heavy, a lot of reading, and not much structure. You find your homeschool group, it's more of an unschooling approach, which is excellent that we have that option. It just didn't fit for us. And so it kind of came to a head in Korea in 2016 or 17. We were getting ready to move to Pyeongtaek, moving from Uijeonbu, which is just north of Seoul, to Pyeongtaek, which is about 70 miles south of Seoul. And Jaden said that she wanted to look at going to middle school because she was lonely, right? The socialization wasn't there in Area 1. We were one of 3, American families. And I mean, you can only kick your kid out the door so many times and say, go learn the local language, which she did pretty well. But even then she's like, just the relationships weren't developing, and you could tell that she needed a little bit more structure. And so Katie Beth did a lot of homework and said, give me 1 more year. She and I sat and talked about what Classical Conversations is, with the weekly, oh my gosh, I've spaced on the term, seminars, with the weekly seminars. And then after, at that point, we were like, okay, we're going to go all in. We're not, once this is it, this looks like it's going to work, we'll give it a 1-year trial run. If it works for her, we're all in until both kids graduate. And so that's kind of how we walked to Classical Conversations.
Yeah, and found us in Korea, which is always really cool. I know, one of the ways that we've grown as an organization, especially internationally, is through the military bases. And I know moving in the military typically happens around June in between the school years, so they do consider some of those things. But a lot of times, those military brats, they go to 18 different institutions in 12 years or something like that. But classical conversations and homeschooling really can help stabilize that as you all have moved around. And now you're at, we call it Fort Bragg still. The military calls it something else here. And you've, been working in the national security space for a long time. And just, thank you for your service. One of the things, when I read this title, I'm not quite sure what it means, but because we've had conversations before about this, what's the layman's term of, what's the data that you looked at, and what was kind of the reason that, ultimately, you kind of started at not kind of a high level, right? No one had really even just looked at the data that we have collected over the last, 40 or 60 years.
It's interesting about the data question, right? Because right now, the National UFO, I'm going to get the name wrong, the National UFO Reporting Center, there we go, that's it, NUFORC, I know it by the acronym, NUFORC, has 127,000 reports. I'd postulate they were testimonies of UAP. Now, to go back, people have attempted to look at this over the years. I have a dear friend of mine who began his quest when he was 15 years old, and he's been looking at the UAP problem for 50 plus years. So the problem hasn't necessarily been research into the phenomena. It's been that stigmas have been attached to those who report it or those who look at it over the years. And because of those stigmas, we haven't really been able to do the depth of analysis needed to get the conversation out in the open, to remove taboo, and to let people tell their story. Now, in the national security space, I investigate national security crimes. It's my primary day job. And a lot of that revolves around people providing testimony to behavior characteristics of what they've encountered from other people. That's essentially how an espionage case is built, right? Is you're proving a negative. How do you prove that somebody is taking classified information when they're doing everything they can to conceal that they're taking classified information, right? So you're working with deceptive information at times. You're working with incomplete information, right? And so that's why we have what's known as a structured analytic technique, is so that way people can follow your steps, how you collected the data, how you process the data, and then how you analyze the data. And so that's important when we look at something like UAP, because UAP being a bit of an enigma, and I might get dinged in the UFO field for using that term, but being that we just don't have a lot of data pointing to, where we don't have a lot of analysis pointing to what it may be, that's synchronized or fused, that it has a lot of the same characteristics of like moving through an espionage investigation. And so in that regard, when we look at something, when we look at how we approach these things, we have to understand that people are reporting what they see. They're reporting what they experience. They're reporting what they encounter. And we should do well to mitigate our cognitive bias to look at someone and say, that's wholly inaccurate or untrue, or because, and without delving too much into the relative truth argument, right? We start with an objective reality that sits on a strong moral subjective. And I believe that was Thomas Aquinas that wrote about that, right? And so what's important is when somebody tells you these extraordinary stories, it could very well be starting from a point of objective reality, right? It's just something has affected them. And that's the data we have to work with. Now, that's part of it. But when you look at the 2004 Nimitz encounter, which a scientific coalition of UAP studies did a beautiful analysis of that encounter, we still have no idea what the tic-tac is or how it was able to maneuver at speeds up to 80,000 miles an hour. And these aren't hyperbolic. These are scientists, like material scientists and physicists, who've researched this topic and researched that particular case, which the USS Nimitz carrier battle group encountered. And through math, that's how they came to these numbers, right? So that's the other part of it, is that you have phenomenological encounters that people testify to occurring, and then you have these events that our pilots capture, who are arguably the most well-trained observers, and just oval-shaped objects that seem to materialize and dematerialize, that seem to have some sort of presence in the ocean and moving out of the ocean. So now it's transmedium, moving from stasis to speed at hypersonic rates. Just, is it a collective pathology? One of my findings is that it's not a collective pathology. People aren't making this up, right? And that's one of my principal findings, is that this doesn't just affect the national security space, but it also has an effect on just the general population. People are seeing things, they're experiencing it, they're able to categorize and report it, right? So, how did we do that? Look at when you look at the 5 core habits of grammar and the 5 common topics, it's essentially the start of a data collection methodology.
Hey everyone, I want to interrupt really quickly to let you know that we are collecting stories. We want to collect your story, in fact, of anything noteworthy or exciting going on in your community so that we can share it with our audience. We have so many great things going on inside of Classical Conversations. So please share your story with us at classicalconversations.com/celebrate-together. That is classicalconversations.com/celebrate-together. And we would love to share your story with the broader community. All right, let's jump back into the show.
All right, Josh, that's wonderful information. Lots of long names. So basically, if I think about it from when I was, a teenager, UFOs, unidentified anomalous phenomenon, and the basics of kind of a national security lens that you were looking at this data. So this was public data that you were exploring and trying to put information on. You were trying to see, were these phenomenon being seen at maybe national security or, key areas? Are they targeting military bases and, power plants, or are they just kind of spread out everywhere? And then is that accurate? And also talk about, you didn't just, obviously 127,000, that's a lot. What were some of the criteria that you tried to whittle down to, where you're saying, okay, we've got our senses. So was it just like any Joe Blow's report on these, or did you kind of try to whittle it down to more, we'll call them credible instances of, seeing what I'll call UFOs, although that's not the current term.
It's okay. We can use UFOs if that's the best way to define it for the context here. That's fine.
Or we'll call it UAPs.
UAP is like, that's what we call it now, right? If you read all the books, they put UAP in it, right? So I get what I'm to reiterate what you're asking is how did I?
What do I actually find in this dissertation? What was what did you actually look at, and what were some of the conclusions from a security standpoint?
Okay, so let's start with a strategic security standpoint, and then we're going to get to the data methodology and the conclusions, right? So, because the data collection methodology is really like what hung on it, and that's the structured analytic technique, right? And we'll get to defining what that is in a second too, right? So, as a national security professional, my main concern is threat to, lives, safety, security, national interest, right? That's what we look at in the national security space, right? So, does UAP pose a threat? That is, question number one. Well, threat takes two. You need two elements for threat: capability and intent, right? Capability is the means by which an entity can impose itself on another entity, and then intent is the desire to do so. So, for example, somebody has a gun, right? They have the capability of using that weapon. But if they're not giving you any behavioral indicators of actually using it, then there's no intent. Threat is low, right? But if they draw the weapon and they point it at you, now, there's capability, intent is presented, and so you can assume that, yes, the threat has increased, right? And so that's essentially like that, like a fundamental means of looking at what is threat. So, but UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, right? If we say, does it pose a threat, we're now lumping it. We're putting together a lot of information and essentially stating that it has one material, set of material components, maybe one actor, and that one actor who is imposing, its will on a population. So we don't know that, right? Like this is still, even though this topic's been researched for 80 years, it's only been in mainstream media and even in thoughtful conversation in the open since I'd say 2017. Right. So it's still very new. I would say it's nascent in a lot of ways, even though we have some.
I watched X-Files growing up.
Oh, perfect. Then that's all you needed. So and the X-Files it takes a lot of creative license with a lot of, various UAP reports that happen over time. Spent a lot of time watching X-Files too. As we delved into this further, or as I delved into this further, instead of it posing a threat, it turned to, do UAP encounters, pose a risk to the national security? Because risk is different. You can mitigate risk. And so that's what the basic research, when I was canvassing all these reports, was pointing towards. And so that became one of the sub-questions that I was attempting to answer. Right. So then moving on to the data collection methodology. When moving through the data collection methodology, you have to have a way to determine credibility of reports, because you can't just look at 127,000 reports and take them all, right? So I went through 20,000 reports roughly 3 times when I was establishing what I called a curation standard, right? And what that curation standard was 6 rules. Had to have 2 sources, and source could be an individual, or it could be 2 individuals. It could be an individual and, some sort of trace signature, like, soil's been burned. It could be a pilot and their aircraft, because one aircraft was stopped mid-flight after the pilot encountered a UAP. When the pilot landed, there was green residue on his wing that wasn't there before. So that green residue becomes a source. Had to have 3 signatures. And the reason why I had to have 3 signatures is because that means that the person who's reporting it has placed it in space and time and has categorized the information. So a lot of these reports are pithy 3 to 5 line statements. Like, I looked up in the sky, I saw something blue, it moved really fast. I felt scared, and I think I should tell somebody. And that's like the context of a lot of these reports, right? So 1 source, 2 signatures, no description, not credible, right? And so as I pared it down, I also used, had to be primary source. And since I didn't conduct any interviews for sake of time on the dissertation, I was able to determine primary source by canvassing 16 references, essentially. 13 books and 3 databases that I looked at to pull the reports. So roughly 20,000 reports of UAP, whittled down to 1,684 that initially met 2 sources placed in space and time. And then those were then further reduced to 684. And that's where we got 2 sources, 3 signatures placed in space and time. And those sources had to be primary. It was essentially like the 4 rules set for curation.
And then you mapped them out. Then you kind of mapped them where they were. And, bottom line, did it appear that there was a strategic methodology or strategic threat potential or risk potential based on where they were being cited?
So I'm going to say this. Based on my study, it looks pervasive. Like, it looks like it's everywhere. However, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies is doing a 6-paper, I think that's what 6 papers, a 6-paper project on the intentions of UAP, and their findings are a little different. Now, some would say that that's controversial and it creates conflict. It really doesn't, not when you understand the means by which you approach the data sets. One individual conducting analysis is not necessarily going to do well to try and define intentions of something that appears to have strategic effect, right? So the intention study group is 3 to 4 individuals who are assessing what the capability or what the intent is based off the data sets that they're using. And we used roughly the same data set. I just looked at it differently.
Right.
And so, future study could be comparing the 2 data sets and see what we come with.
So your research kind of showed that there wasn't, they weren't looking at specifically high risk areas. They were just kind of everywhere. And they're kind of trying to say, what's the intent, and seeing if they feel like that the threat level might be higher than what your initial research showed. And this is, beginning of the research. So it's hard to come to any, concrete conclusions at this mind, because it's always like, I think at the end of most dissertations is, here's what I would do next if I had unlimited time, resources.
Yeah, and it's funny,
energy.
Right? So at the end of the dissertation, right, because that's one of the things that came out, they were like, okay, so what's your recommendations? And all my recommendations to policymakers were essentially, use the tools of, the institution of government to better understand risk assumed, right? What capabilities are within the 3 branches of government to understand the risk or the threat that could be present by these, whatever these phenomenological encounters are. To researchers and practitioners, it was fuse your data to researchers essentially. It's like, hey, we have, physicists are looking at it this way, international relations is looking at it this way. The professors of religions and even elements within the institution of Christianity, I think that's a good way to put it. The institution of Christianity are looking at it this way. National security is looking at it this way. Like, start bringing that together, right? And then on the practitioner side, it was build a methodology of collecting better data.
Yeah. So I think one of the issues that we've talked about, off screen is the data is all over the place because there's not like one standardized form where there's the relevant data that could help researchers really get better data. That's like, okay, someone calls in and they say a UAP, here's the 10 questions to ask them, and try to collect that data so we can get as much, information in standardized form as possible. So it's actually easier to compare and contrast.
Yeah. Yes, that is a key point. And my predecessors, those that came before me, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and a lot of people have been looking at this issue for decades, right? Who have, refined databases, but they couldn't move forward on it. So we have the methods available to build a standardized form to best approach the issue. Matt, I have templates in the back of my dissertation to where, I offer a way of gathering factual data, like factual evidence. And when I say fact, that's based on the report from the individual. And then you have a report that describes how the interview went. Were they receptive to talking to you? Were they not? Was it hard to extrapolate the information? Was it easy? So that way we can. It helps to best understand if the source is reporting reliably. And again, that's not a ding against the source, right? It's that we have to determine credibility of report, right? And so I spend a lot of time in the national security space working on this, right? And none of this is classified. It's just how you approach people and how you engage them and how they receive, like the semantics of the interaction as to whether or not they may open up about this. And the thing is eyewitness testimony, we say, it's not reliable. It lacks a lot of, key points right. We convict people in eyewitness testimony. There's a lot of questions about that. It's important that within in the space that I'm talking about, you can use a human sensor to then put a multimodal sensor array, and multimodal means more than one sensor. You can put a sensor package in an area based off of, consistency of reports in a specific area. We'd call that a cluster area, and just see if there's something that, these sensor arrays can pick up, right? So, we're not trying to take people to trial for this. This isn't like affidavits or it's, hey, we're encountering something. Is there a means to see what else it is, right? And so there's actually momentum in the field now to move in that direction. Organizations like UAP Expedition recently did I don't know, they're physicists, so I don't know if it's a study. They took their sensor package to the location, and I forget the name of the location. It's off the coast of San Diego, where the Nimitz encounter occurred, and turned on their sensor package just to see what they picked up. And they picked up something that's anomalous that they still can't explain, as they're going through their null hypotheses to break it down. Right, that's key, because we have this massive Tic Tac encounter in 2004, and they went out there just 2 years ago, and they still picked up something anomalous. Now, again, anomalous does not mean material object flying around doing crazy stuff. Just something anomalous came across their sensors. And then Galileo project that I believe Harvard with Avi Loeb, Dr. Avi Loeb is running as well. They also have a unique capability to do the same, but I'm not as intimately familiar with their findings as I am with UAP Expedition. So that's essentially like how we approach, or we should approach, the human sensor. And that's a recommendation I make.
Nice. Well, if they want to read this, is there a way to get a copy of this, or what's the best way for them to connect with you or learn more about UAPs if they're interested in diving more into this subject?
So my dissertation and my slides that I presented at the SCU conference, I keep messing up the title, the Anomalous Aerospace Phenomena Conference hosted by the SCU, the slides I presented there and the dissertation are up on Zenodo, and I can give you a link to do that.
Put the link in the show notes.
And if you're looking to get into the study of UAP, it really depends on how you want to approach it. What I would recommend is have your mind wide open, right? Like that's the best way to approach it. You have to be careful to not start with a rejection, right? Because these encounters have, I'll use Jacques Vallée's words, Dr. Jacques Vallée. He has written numerous works on the topic, and I would say if you're going to start the study of UAP, start with Dr. Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek. And Dr. Jacques Vallée said the phenomena appears to be both physical and psychic in nature. So those seem to be two terms that are contradictory in and of themselves when you put them together. But that is when I approach this problem set and I have people that come and talk with me about their experiences, that is my starting point, both physical and psychic in nature. So that would be my initial recommendation, would be to start with Dr. Jacques Vallée and Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
All right. Well, Josh, thank you so much for coming to the show today. Audience, you get to decide for yourself. Is it aliens, demons, angels, some foreign country, or just mass hallucination events? Josh, thank you so much for coming on and explaining what's going on in the UAP world, and just for your service for this country and your service to your family.
Thank you, Robert. It was an absolute pleasure to be here today, and I appreciate the time you gave me to talk about such a complex topic. Looking forward to doing this again.
Hey everyone, if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to share it with a friend. I know that UAPs have been in the news much more over the past 2 years than they have historically, and it's so cool to have a Classical Conversations dad who loves the Lord, being one of the top researchers in this field. So give it a listen, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and be sure to tune in next week to our next episode. God bless and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortins. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation, and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.